moving to the third chapter, which is kind of work advice, my work process, my work ethics and stuff like that, and some questions related to my career. So X-Cruelis asks, at what age did you start to get interested in music? I think that was about 8 years old that my parents enrolled me into the local conservatory, and I really soon started enjoying it. It was something that I really had fun with, so that was about, I was about 8. BZX asks, what thing specifically made you think about being a musical composer right now? Well, I don't think about it right now. I've been a composer for many years now. Professionally in games, it's been about 10 years. In general, I've been writing music for many years. So I don't know if I can answer as far as the right now. But Smiley YouTuber asks, what made you become a composer? And then Chaos Crab asks, do you think you were destined to be a musician, or was there another path you could have chosen? Did you grow up with the intention to make music, or was this all an afterthought? Keep up the good work. Well, it was definitely not an afterthought, because it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of patience. It's really hard to be a composer, and it's also even harder to make a living out of being a composer. So it's definitely not an afterthought. If I was destined, I guess this ties to BZX's question about the specificity of it. Here's the thing. When I was at the time and the age in my life that I had to start thinking seriously and deciding career paths, music was something that came naturally to me for 2 reasons. First of all, we were playing with bands with my friends and stuff, and it never occurred to me that we are going to stop doing this and start doing something else, like becoming, I don't know, a lawyer, a physics professor, a plumber, what have you, anything. And the other thing was that it was easier for me to study music than study math or study history or anything at that time. And I find myself enjoying studying more now, but during my time in school, music was just something so natural to me that I felt like, if I can make a job out of this, then this is perfect. Of course, at that time, I was not specifically thinking of composition. I was more thinking about bands and kind of, playing gigs and doing all that stuff. But when I started methodically studying about composition and theory and all that stuff, it was much easier than spending many hours at the piano and studying the piano. It was much easier for me to, have a piece of paper, stare at the computer and figure out the theory behind writing fugues or, doing analysis of music and writing small compositions. So that was kind of the thing that led me into it. It took a while for me to actually figure out ways to make money from it and survive, but it never occurred to me to do something else. But destined, I want to talk a little bit about this word destined. I don't believe in that at all. I could have become anything else, and in fact, you ask if there was another path. Yes, I could have chosen another path. I would probably take a creative path. Even now, as we speak, I'm sort of studying and learning about video editing because it's something that fascinates me, and not in terms of doing the video editing for YouTube videos, but it fascinates me as far as the art of video editing in film. And I think that if I had started that when I was, 18 or 20 or 25 even, I would not mind having become an editor. I would love it. I would love it equally as I love music, because I find it very creative. The thing I always joke about is that if I could go back right now, I would choose to become a writer, because I wouldn't have to bother with all the technology and the technical aspects of writing music, because writing music on the computer and stuff, it's really hard on the technical aspect alone. I'm not talking even about learning software and stuff. I'm talking about having a computer that works. That's already too hard. So if I could I take my iPad or a piece of paper and go out and write, that would make me happy. So that might be an alternative path for me, even down the road, who knows? Wire Knight asks, why do you make music? I think the reason that I make music is because I want to express myself. I want to just say something and share something with the world, and comment and have a conversation with the world. Music and all art is kind of a conversation. You need to be having a dialectical relationship with your audience, with the historical moment in time. So that's kind of part of the process. Now, if I was to answer this question when I was 16, I would say because it's cool being in a band. I was playing the drums back then and it was really cool. But this has evolved over time as I'm learning about music, as I'm developing my personality and all that stuff. So yeah, why I make music right now is to have this conversation, to express something, put out something in the world and get something back from it. Phoebus Petsimeris asks, being from Greece myself, I believe there's a significant chance that your parents, relatives, people around you dissuaded you from making video game music or music in general for a living. If that is true, then what was your mindset and plan when you stepped into the sound industry and had no idea if you would make it or not? If that's not true, then I suppose there must have been at some point in your life personal stress concerning financial issues and unemployment. How did you deal with these issues? And again, what was your mindset coming into such an ambiguous industry such as the video game one? Okay, that's a great question, Fivo. I was lucky. My parents never told me, don't get into music, you need to find, like a proper career or anything like that. Instead, they actually encouraged this. But that was because I showed them very early on that I'm dead serious about this. I was studying a lot. I had the privilege of being able to be supported financially by my parents to some degree, but I made up for their support by literally spending nothing. During my childhood and honestly my 20s, I lived with the barest of means. So that was kind of my, again, showing them that I'm serious about this and I'm willing to kind of deprive myself of some of the things that my friends were doing in order to give them the leeway to support me. Now, as far as financial stress and stuff, of course I had a ton of stress, especially during my late 20s, like around 25 until my 30s. That was a time when I was really sort of depressed and I spent a lot of time not doing anything because I couldn't figure out the way to actually make a living. I made a little bit of money, but I wasn't making a living by any means. So I was really stressed. I thought, do I need to, search for something else? Do I need to just do odd jobs to make a living and stuff? And it was a really hard time. And what I needed to do was a drastic change of scenery, which is the time that I went to Amsterdam and took a master's, and it was not that I gained this new knowledge, it was this radical change in my life that, I'm in a new place, reinventing myself, meeting new people, being in an environment that is really creative. As far as the game industry specifically, it was something that I always wanted to get into. It was kind of my savior, to be honest. The cosmic alignment that happened in which Bandcamp was a thing, indie games was a thing, remote working was a thing. I could work on a computer, didn't need a studio. All those stars aligning made it possible for me. So yeah, it was the gaming industry was not so much a scary place for me as a kind of a salvation, finally a way to make ends meet. I don't know, I hope this answers your question. It's a question that I could literally do a whole video about, but maybe some other time. Spicy Loaf at CatGod2507 asks, if you didn't make music, what would you be doing? As I said, I would probably be doing video editing or writing. Of course, I'm a very bad writer, but in my dreams, I'm a great writer and I travel the world with my notebook and just sit on coffee shops and write my novels or my short stories or whatever. And I make a living like that. A person can dream, But film editing, yeah, I don't know. It's something that I really like. Maybe I'll stop being a musician right now and pursue a new career. So some questions about my studies. I already talked a little bit about it, but let's delve a little bit deeper. Eric Arath Visueth Roldan asks, what did you study and what encouraged you to make music for video games? Well, I studied a lot of things. I started by studying piano, and thankfully my local conservatory had obligatory theory lessons. I know it sounds bad because who likes theory, right? But it was actually a great thing because it introduced me to this world of theory and why music works and the whole thing, which is truly fascinating to me. So eventually, when I left my hometown and came to Athens to study more methodically, I continued doing theory. I did harmony, I did counterpoint, I did orchestration, I did composition. I also continued a little bit studying the piano. I have also taken drum lessons at some point, and eventually I went to Amsterdam and did a master's on film music, which was great. We did film music analysis, and we sat on the editing bay and watched short films being made, and we sat in the mixing bay and mixed our music with sound, and we wrote music for the films, and etc., etc. So these are my studies, more or less. I also study all the time on my own, both music and music production, something I pursue every day, because it's a kind of an endless field. What I encourage you to make music for video games. I was a gamer when I was a young boy. A game that triggered this real fascination and kind of made me truly pay attention to video game music and see it as something unique. It was Monkey Island 2, because with Monkey Island 2 they introduced this IMU system, which was kind of adaptive music. So you would go from room to room and the music would kind of change, but in a smooth way. It was playing back MIDI, it would change instrumentation, bring new themes and all that stuff. It was really great, and at that point I was like, okay, you can do something really unique that is not applicable to other music. Another two significant revelations for me was the soundtrack of Grim Fandango and the soundtrack for Hitman 2, Silent Assassin. The first written by Peter McConnell and the second by Jesper Kyd. Grim Fandango is a jazz soundtrack which felt to me so great and different and magnificent, and like this new sonic world opening, not because of jazz. I knew jazz and I had listened to jazz, but because of bringing it into the game world so seamlessly, so fitting and so appropriately. And then Hitman 2 was one of my first introductions to orchestral music being used in games, and I know that other games had done it before, especially Japanese games, but it was all done using sample instruments, and it always, this era, this kind of transition to the 16-bit era and this use of sample stuff never sounded good. I don't have a particular nostalgia for it because at the time I was deep into studying music and I could understand why MIDI sounds the way it sounds. But this transition into this sampled orchestral stuff, which were very bad samples or very synthesized samples, just never clicked for me because I knew in my head what they were trying to replicate and just never got there. But with Hitman, suddenly they just recorded like proper orchestra and put it on the soundtrack. It was so magnificent and so glorious and has great themes, borrowing elements from all over the world, because you know in Hitman you go into all this place, you go to Russia, you go to Japan, you go to the Middle East and all that stuff, so it was really great. Although I have to say that at this time where I was playing these games, it was still not quite possible for me. I could not imagine actually doing it. It was something more of a dream, that it would be super cool, but it was not really plausible for a person living in Greece actually pursuing this. But you know, as I said before, it eventually kind of the stars align and it happened. Tyler H. asked, what is your musical background? Did you go to music school? Yes, as I said, I went to several music schools in Sparta, my hometown, in Athens, in Amsterdam. My musical background is twofold. There's obviously the stuff that I took from my studies, all the piano-oriented music like Chopin and the classical era, like the Mozart, the keyboard music of Bach, which is a huge influence, the great orchestral repertoire, and learning the history of music and the divisions of eras, which, you know, most of the people, and I was one of those people when I was, you know, a teenager, it was classical music, it was like this huge category, and now it's Renaissance music, the Baroque era, the classic, Romanticism, 20th century music, atonal, 12-tone stuff, avant-garde stuff, and the modern orchestral stuff. All this, the separation that happened and the appreciation of each of these eras and why they exist and how they were formed and what were their influences and how they influenced other art, what the discussion was. That's all part of my background now. And of course, on the other side, for many years when I came back from school, I would sit next to the stereo in our house, put on headphones and get a CD and put the entire album while dinner was being cooked or something, and I would read every line of lyrics, every little thank you, every copyright note or whatever, everything. I would learn it by heart. And the music that I would listen to was what we now call classic rock. It was like Pink Floyd, Queen, Dream Theater, stuff like prog rock, a bit more heavy metal. And one of my hugest influence ever is the Beatles. I've listened to the Beatles more than anything in my life, and I will never not be fascinated by their music. So much output and so influential output that is really unprecedented. And there's also the influence, I guess, from Greek and Eastern music that is definitely part of my musical background in a way. Mr. Defuznik or Diffuser asks, did you learn from someone or are you self-taught? Well, as I said, I went to several music schools and I had a lot of teachers. Some of them great, some of them really great. But I also am self-taught, but I want to put a bit of an asterisk in the term because I don't really like the term self-taught because nobody sits down and invents stuff and learns stuff on their own. I'm self-taught in the sense that I wasn't in a classroom or with a teacher. But if you're reading a book or if you're watching a video, you're learning from those things. So I'm learning from the YouTuber that put up a video about music production. I'm learning from the guy who wrote the book that I'm reading. So yeah, it's a mixed bag, although I would say the majority of my learnings and the most important parts of my music knowledge comes from teachers inside classrooms. And I really do value that part of my education. Isaac Lowe asks, where did you learn to make music from and how do I play music like you? Well, first of all, I talked a little bit about where I learned to make music. It's part of my learning from all those music schools and stuff and pursuing this knowledge. But how do I play music like you? Well, first of all, you don't. And then the most important thing is that you shouldn't try to play music like me. You should try to play music like you. And that's what will make you unique and what will make you stand out, first of all, and then happy, I think, most of all. Because, I mean, if you want to play music like someone else, that's fine. If that makes you happy, I guess. I know this is not what you're asking. I understand the question, but I'm jumping off from this opportunity to talk a little bit about this, that you should try to be your own person, especially in your creative output. So let's talk a little bit about the video game industry. Raiden Lucio asks, this is the second part of his question, what were your first steps to being known in the gaming industry? That's a great question, Lucio, because I'm not known in the gaming industry. I still haven't taken that first step. I know that you guys know me from Risk of Rain and stuff, but I can assure you that the gaming industry has no idea who I am, doesn't care about me. I'm not saying this pitifully or anything, it's just the way it is. M. Benjamins asks, hey man, how did you get together with Hopu and how do you look for opportunities in the music industry? Okay, so I talked a little bit about my meeting with Hopu. You can go to this timestamp and check it out. Now, looking for opportunities in the music industry, which of course relates to the question Lucio asked about what are the steps to being known in the music industry. First of all, don't have a goal of being known. Have a goal of writing music that is good, that you're proud of, and in a very practical and material sense, music that puts food on the table. How to do that? I get this question asked a ton of times. How I did it was by sending 1,000 emails. Actually, scratch that, sending 10,000 emails. You know how they say you need to spend 10,000 hours on something to master it? Well, to get myself in the gaming industry, I sent 10,000 emails and I got a reply to the 10,000. In other words, it takes a lot of patience. I sent a lot of portfolios, never got answers. Sometimes I got an answer that was like, thank you, we're not looking right now, or thank you, we already have someone, or thank you, we'll keep it in our catalog and maybe contact you at some other time, whatever. Eventually I got a reply, which led me to my first gig, which was The Sea Will Claim Everything. These were also my steps afterwards. I kept looking for work. With every job I got, it became a little bit easier. People started offering work to me, which was kind of a relief and it made me feel a bit safer. But yeah, you just keep on doing it. I guess if I was in the US, it would have been a little bit easier because I could have gone to conventions and stuff and meet people, which is super important. If you are in the US, you don't know what a huge privilege that is. Now, a thing that you can do now, which was not such a big thing because indie games were not such a huge thing. I came into the scene just when, you know, Braid broke through and Machinarium and all that stuff. But now there are constantly game jams going on, and game jams is a great way to put your foot in the door, so to speak, of the gaming industry with a low risk. If you don't write great music or if your game is not very successful, you don't lose anything. Game jams are fast, you know, you spend from a few days to maybe a couple of weeks or something. So yeah, game jams is a great way, I think, to familiarizing yourself with how gaming works. And also, you know, get to meet some people or maybe be lucky enough to be one of the breakout games in such a jam and have a bit of a portfolio that is actually music in a game instead of just, you know, music that you put out on SoundCloud and stuff. David Slagle asks, what's the best thing about writing music for games instead of TV, movies, greeting cards that play a song when you open them, haunted music boxes, etc.? And what's the most challenging? Well, first of all, there's nothing more exciting. You can never top writing for a haunted music box. That's just out of the question. There's no way you can top that. But all the other stuff, I wouldn't say necessarily best. There are pros and cons on each field. The big difference between games and visual media like film and TV and stuff is time. The domain of time, because in films and stuff it's fixed. You have a scene and it starts there and it ends there. Games only do that once in a while when you have a cutscene. Otherwise, you're not really sure how the player will react and be informed of that music, how much time they will spend on a level, if they're gonna get stuck solving a puzzle and listen to the same music for days. So I wouldn't say it's better or worse. I would say it's different, and I enjoy doing both. Writing for games has always felt more free, exactly because I don't have this, you know, confinement of time. As far as more challenging, I think that writing for film is the most challenging. You have a creative voice that is the voice of the director that there is no way to ignore and is always a prominent voice. I'm not saying you should ignore it, I'm saying that it's his vision at the end that you're realizing. In games, I mean, again, there's a creative director or there's like a top level person that is kind of the designer or what have you, but there's more of let the composer do his thing. In film, the relationship is much more involved. I'm not 100% sure because I haven't worked in a ton of films or anything. I've done a few short films, I've done one feature film, but in all of those I had a very tight collaboration with the director. I do collaborate with people in games, but they're not so involved in... I've had directors who were like, no, we need to change this note. Cable Movie Camera, they ask, how is your music affected by where you live, local influences, etc.? I know you don't like the idea of musical reprises or remakes, not true, but lots of the great music from Risk of Rain 2 benefits from borrowing aspects of that last game's music. What sets those apart? Okay, let's tackle the first part. How is my music affected by where I live? It's mostly in the background, it's like in my, you know, it's in the back of my head and trying to burn. I can give you a specific example if you want. In The Raindrop That Fell to the Sky, that whole second part is essentially me recreating a clarinet solo that happens in Greek music and Eastern music. The band will just repeat something and then a clarinet player will do something that is very lyrical and mournful many times. That was what I was trying to recreate. Of course, I put it within the context of the music and in a Western framework, but still, that was the exact thing that I wanted to do. Another way that it comes through a lot is by my use of odd meter. In Western music, odd meter is usually treated as a shortened 4/4. You know, you take a 4/4 and you steal 1/8 and then you have a 7/8 bar. But in Greek music and in Eastern music, that's not at all the way that it's treated. It comes from dance and it's very, very specific. Why you will choose a 7/8, why you will have a 5/4, why you will have a 9/8. These are all very specific reasons, usually related with dance, and they have a very specific usage. And so I like to use these meters a lot. Everything is a part of the composition for me, like from the notes, from the key, the tempo, the time signature, all of those are very important. So yeah, that's another way that my heritage or the place I live influences my music. To the second part, it's not that I don't like musical reprises and remakes. This is what I don't like. I don't like a combination album that is all reggae music that is remake of pop songs, because that's not creative. That's a cynical thing. That has a use in a beach bar, and it will play there, and people will be like, "Oh yeah, I know this song," and they will feel happy and they will sing along or whatever. But it's not. There's no creativity behind that. It's kind of a template. You take a template, you take a piece of music that people know, and you translate it into that template, and that's all there is to it. And it's just about the money. Another reason why I don't like it is because this is the exact way that this mentality of remakes and covers has been applied to video game music to a destructive degree, if you ask me. It has torn apart every sort of creativity from it, because you get 100% cynical with these remakes. If you have, a billion remakes of Megalovania for, I don't know, marimba and farts, this is not creative. You know that your video will get a little bit of traction, you will get some plays on Spotify. If you're the guy who does every video game of music with kazoo, okay, great, but that's not creative. You're not doing anything. You're doing the same thing all over and over. You just take some other people's hard work and you put it into this context, and either because it's cool, it's funny, it's random, it's whatever. And I don't like that, because it literally drowns any sort of creativity. And this is why I always say to people who want to cover my music, I say, do it under two conditions. First of all, be creative, make creative choices. I've seen people say, I did a heavy metal cover of Copen as Fuck. Well, la-di-da, it is already heavy metal. What are you doing? Take Copen as Fuck and make it, I don't know, synthwave, man. Do something creative. Turn it into a classical piece. Play for bassoon and oboe and do something with the orchestration, with the melodies. And the second thing is, don't do it for money. Because if you're doing it for money, then I don't care, man. It sucks. It sucks. Do it for your own practice. Do it to, have a bit of a stepping stone, have a familiar composition so that people bother to listen to your music. Okay, perfect, I understand it. But don't be that guy who does, the 1,000 covers and again with the same thing. Be creative and don't do it for the money. Do it for the love of music. These types of covers I tend to like when I hear that the artist has done a cover completely reimagining a piece of music that they love. And I can give you a recent example. My Friend of Misery by Metallica, they put out a cover album, and this cover album is a great example of what I'm talking about, because a lot of the covers there, you can see that they invited a lot of artists and they have not been creative at all. They kind of sort of replicated the thing and they're just singing on top of it or something. But there's one particular cover by Kamasi Washington, who's a great saxophonist, and if you listen to his cover and the original song, they're nothing alike. There's a completely new reinterpretation, which is so magical and so mind-blowing, and he takes the pieces to a completely new world, and this is something that I love, and this is something that I want to see from covers. So it's not that I don't love it, it's just that I'm so fed up with the cynicism behind it. And about me using material from Risk of Rain 1 in Risk of Rain 2, that's not doing remakes or covers. There are a couple of places where I did reprises, I recalled stuff, but that's a different thing, because it's supposed to have a continuation, it's supposed to be in the same universe, so to speak. But even if you look at it, usually I'm taking it and transforming it into something else. The Risk of Rain theme, you can hear it in so many permutations. I'm trying to be creative with it, So let's talk about genre and genre efficiency. And there's a tweet from Danai Kokoya, who is a fellow composer, by the way. She asks, did you ever have to compose and deliver music that you didn't actually like? And is there a genre of music that you wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole? I wouldn't say not actually like, I would say not satisfied with how I produced it or made it or composed it. There were a few occasions on working on films in which I wasn't writing music that I didn't like, but I was doing things with the music that I wouldn't do if I was left on my own. I felt that I'm getting a direction I disagreed with. There were times that I had to give in and do their thing, because at the end of the day is their vision. Now, as far as genres, I don't like doing jazz, because when I try to do jazz, I'm bad at it because I haven't studied enough. I'm not very familiar with the nitty-gritty of jazz. So when I attempt to do jazzy things, it always sounds to me like a person mimicking jazz in a very poor way. So I try to avoid it. If I was to do something like that, I would probably call players that are living and breathing jazz and consult with them. I work with an orchestrator that can do things like that. I guess that's the only genre that I would rather avoid. You know, if somebody came to me, I want you to write a jazz soundtrack, I would say, I think you should find someone else. Jorklai asks, is there any genre you struggle with for music? That was the question that I just replied. Ferreol Buron asks, are there any genres of music you want to make? Yes, all of them. I want to make every type of music. I love music so much, I'm curious about it. I'm always interested in discovering new styles, music from other places, using different scales and methods and different frameworks. This is always fascinating to me, and I try to incorporate stuff like that in my music. For example, when I was in Amsterdam, I took a course in Carnatic music, which is music from South India, and I took a 2-year course which only dealt with the rhythmic aspect. It didn't even go into the melodies, the scales that they use. And that was so mind-opening for me. I mean, I was always interested in weird rhythmic stuff, but also gave me a lot of tools that are not part of the Western toolkit. And I use these things all the time, especially in stuff like Risk of Rain. So let's talk a little bit about the process. Cafe Adorno asks, has there been a song that was too challenging? Only the ones worth writing, my friend. This is what happens. I start with an idea. I struggle with it a lot. I listen to the same thing over and over and over and over and over. At some point, the composition unlocks and I figure out the form, I figure out the parts and all this. And then comes the hard part, which is taking it from a rough demo, which I didn't care about timing and proper phrasing and whatever, to actually recording the stuff or programming the drums, because I don't want to have a drum loop that repeats over and over. I want every little drum loop to be nuanced and have differences and have detail and textures and stuff. It comes a point where the thing is mostly realized and it's complete, and I listen to it, and at that point I always 100% look back and I say, how did I do that? When did I do that?
Did I do that?
How did that came to be? And this is kind of a fascinating process to me, because I understand that there's a practical skill involved, which I study every day, and yet from start to finish it's always a magical process, and at the end it's always a kind of mystification that happens, and you're looking at it and you say,
did I do that?
And in that sense, every piece that I've done has been a challenge. I don't know, I hope this answers your question. Stone Mortem asks, are you working on anything now? I would also like to know how your creative process works. Are you just given a general idea and you go with it, or are they more in-depth with what they want? Vasco Bernardo asks, do you write without having seen a level gameplay at all, or do you have some idea of what's coming when composing? Charlie Burham asks, when you're working on a game soundtrack, how much info about the game do you get before you start composing? Do you just get an overview of the story and gameplay? Do you use concept art? Do you actually get to play the levels where a song will be used? In Deadbolt, your music fits the game more so well. It seems like you must have known everything about it to make the music. Okay, here's the thing. I usually get as much info as possible. I ask for as much info as possible. I like to learn a lot about the lore. I definitely get anything that is visually connected to the game at the specific time. So when I'm starting a project, if you have concept art, I will look at concept art. If you have a demo, I will play the demo. But I stopped after a point on. For example, doing Risk of Rain 2, I got to play a little bit of the early demo, got to get a feel of the game and the aesthetics, but it didn't bother when, like seeing every update in the graphics or looking at every single level or, all that stuff. I had the idea, I knew the style of music that we were going for, so I worked on like that. Now, it's interesting that you ask about Deadbolt, because Deadbolt is a curious case, because if you have played the game, there are different gangs that the protagonist fights, and these gangs have a particular style, and this comes also with style of music. And this is something that we talked about very, very early on. I think it was in the first email Hopu sent me, and they said, here's the concept behind it. We're gonna have these different gangs and we're gonna want different styles of music. So yeah, that was a case in which the style was discussed very early on and very specifically, you know. How do you generally approach writing music, asks Stuart Adams. Where do you start and how do you develop your initial ideas into something you find interesting? Well, there are two ways that I start. One is just sitting at the piano and trying out ideas and bringing a composition to life, you know, note by note and theme by theme and chord by chord, progression by progression. And the other way is I just start with a blank session on my computer and I try to think of ideas that can be from thematic material to a synth sound, to a synth loop or, you know, a pattern, to a drum pattern sometimes. Just build on it and build and build and build. As I said before, this usually takes a lot of time, a lot of experimentation, and a lot of putting down rough material that then kind of gets constructed into a thing that has an actual form, and then taking all this material and replaying and finalizing it to make it sound proper. How make it interesting is always a criterion that I have for myself. I want to feel that the music I make is interesting, and I try to renew myself, and that's why I keep learning about music, because I bring new stuff I've learned into new stuff. I also try to experiment with gear. It's a privileged thing to say, but sometimes you buy a new plugin and you get inspired by a preset or because the way the plugin is organized. For example, a Glacier eventually farts. It was 100% inspired by a new plugin that Cubase added, which is a cool delay that had all these very modular functions and stuff. You can do a lot of funky stuff with it. And I was experimenting with that, and one of the sounds of Risk of Rain, and it kind of created one of the basic foundational blocks of the piece, just came from experimenting with that delay unit. The creative process is very chaotic. It's hard to describe, you know. It's weird because it's both chaotic and also disciplined. Diego Borjas asks, what's your creative process when making a track? We'll kind of more or less talked about that. Do you do the tracks before or after seeing where they'll be used on? Well, two things. About the creative process, let me add something to this. A lot of part of my creative process is completely devoid of music. What I mean by that is before I sit at the piano, before I open the workstation and start writing, I've done a lot of thinking, and this happens on several stages. I'm not talking about, you know, taking 10 minutes to think about the composition and stuff. I'm talking about I'm invited to do a project and I take a couple of weeks, I don't even touch musical instruments at all. What I do is that I will introduce myself to new ideas, be that musically, like discover a new band, listen to some albums, find a new painter and look at their work, read a new book that I haven't read, anything like that will jumpstart the brain and into getting into this mode of new stuff are being input, so new stuff can be outputted later on. So this is a huge part of my creative process, and it's a very important part. About seeing where my tracks will be used, well, no, actually not all the time. Sometimes I just write, let's call it stock music, and I say to Hopu, I have these 4 tracks that I consider them to be level music, exploration music. So take them and put them at the levels that you see them fitting. And sometimes this will happen in 2 ways. I have either written music after the fact, the levels exist and we, you know, kind of pair them, or sometimes I have written music before a level is created. So they know that they have this music, and maybe the idea of the level, the atmosphere of the level will be influenced by the music. So this is an interesting thing that might happen sometimes. All right, Rafael Marquez asks, how do you deal with creative block, if you ever had any? And when writing music, where do you start? The rhythm, melody, leitmotif, harmony. Right now I kind of struggle with creative block and don't know how to give me a boost, so to speak. Okay, great question, creative block. We've all had it. There are 2 things that I do about creative block. The first thing is that I try to catch up to creative block, exactly using the method that I just mentioned, which is feed my brain with new ideas before I start writing the music. This is a great way to beat creative block. And to make it even more precise, sometimes I've literally gotten myself out of creative block by taking a specific piece of music that I like and saying, let me copy it. And the process of copying it is something that is inevitably filtered by your own understanding of music and your own personality, that in the end you never end up with a copy, but you end up with a literally new thing. Now, another thing that I do is that block or no block, I will sit down and write. Because writing music is, of course, there's an inspiration that comes into it, and you need to have a little bit of, that magic moment or anything. But it's also very much a skill that you learn. It's a craft. So even if I have zero inspiration, I can always sit down on the piano and write something. And even if I the next day scratch it and say, what is this? This doesn't work, it's not good, it doesn't work for what I wanted, it doesn't matter, because from the gazillion ideas that exist, I took one and I discarded it. So I have a gazillion minus one. So I'm that much closer to the thing that I'm looking for. So, sit down and write, and even if it doesn't work out, you're still gonna take a tiny step forward. And at the end of the day, if you're really not feeling like it, take your brain away from it. Don't think about the creative block. Go take a walk, listen to a podcast. Go cook. Cooking is a great thing because you need to sort of focus on what you're doing, because you have to pay attention, like not to burn stuff, how much material you're gonna use. That it really kind of empties your brain. It really can take away all the stress of what you actually need to do, like the music that you need to write. And the other thing is, just spend a day replying to email, do your taxes, look for new plugins, do things that will save you some time later on. You're not wasting time, so to speak, but you're also not stressing out about the music that you're not writing. So balance it out a little bit like that. And as far as when writing, where do you start? The rhythm, melody, leitmotif, as I said before, it's kind of chaotic. Rhythmic stuff are very often a starting point for me. Harmony stuff are also very often. Many times I will sit and just write a chord progression. Melodic stuff usually comes later. I'd say that most of the times it's rhythmic and harmony stuff that are the initial spark. Seth Vasquez asks, I noticed a lot of favorites question in the comments here, so in the interest of an original question... Okay. First of all, I've left all the favorites for later, so now you get to see how many of those questions are not favorites. Let us judge how original your question is, okay? Okay, so let's see your original question. What's your morning routine? What do you do over the course of the day? Have a particular favorite coffee, or do you like tea better? You know what? I'll give you that. It's an original question. So, my morning routine, that's a great question actually. The way I work is I prefer to work in the afternoons. That's the thing. This also helps because I usually work with people that are in the US, and it helps with, being able to communicate easier. And exactly because of that, I do have this morning routine, which is this. For many years now, almost every day, I sit at a coffee place that I love and sit for an hour and read a book. If I don't do it, if I don't get my coffee with my book, I feel that the day hasn't started. And this is a routine that I've done for almost 10 years, and I really cherish it, and it helps a lot with creativity. Another thing that I've started doing a few years ago was running. This is not particularly a morning routine. I will do it either in the morning or late at night, and this really helps me because feeling healthy, it really does helps a lot with creativity. I'm sitting on a desk for so many hours a day. If I didn't have this, I would feel like I'm really rotting. So yeah, a favorite coffee, I drink double espresso most of the times. I don't have a particular brand that I like, but I do know how I like my coffee. First of all, no sugar, no milk. I know that I go to the coffee place that I go and they have great coffee. And if they didn't, I would find another one. I do enjoy tea, and I also like to drink herbal infusions, is that the word? I wouldn't say better or worse than coffee, although I do drink coffee almost every day, but I don't drink tea every day. So let's talk about career stuff. The Real Vitae Music asks, I'm just wondering, what's your career been like so far? As in, what steps did you take up to this point? Let me also read the following question from Jegothi. How come you haven't moved on to larger projects? Most people usually join a large company, work with a bigger team, or try to get a deal with a AAA studio after they've built up an impressive portfolio like yours. So my career so far, I was writing for indie games and I'm still writing for indie games. What has changed is my capability to make a living from it. Because when I started, I didn't make a living, and now I make a living from it. I have enough money to, keep my PC updated, to buy the occasional new synth once in a while, to pay my rent and my utilities, to get food on the table, and that's kind of makes me happy. As far as moving to larger projects and AAA studios and stuff, first of all, if there's somebody offering this gig, send me the offer and I'll consider it for sure, but I wouldn't move. That's the one thing. If a AAA studio wants me to move to, the US or the UK, I wouldn't do it at this point. My life is here and I'm settled here, so this is not an option. So maybe this is a reason why I haven't really pursued it actively. But the other thing is, I'm enjoying the way I work a lot to kind of break it by getting into the studio system and having to work on, large-scale projects where I don't have so much creative input. So I'm not sure if I would like that. To be honest, more of what I want from my life is eventually to stop writing for games and start writing my own music. Maybe not a lot of people will listen to, but it will feed my soul, creatively. I don't know if this answers your question, but so a few questions about general advice that I might have to offer to people. What advice would you give to your old self? That's a tough one. You know what I would tell him?
Don't believe his lies. He is the one. Kill him.
Then Zooch says, what advice would you give to someone who wants to start doing electronic composition? Your music really made me interested, but I have no idea where to start as I have no prior musical experience. Okay, so here's the thing. Music, it's like a tree with branches. You can't find yourself on a branch without having climbed the bark. So I would say, first of all, get some musical experience. A great way to do that is learn a little bit about playing an instrument. You don't have to be a virtuoso guitarist or piano player or kazoo player or whatever. You don't even need to necessarily learn to read sheet music, although it does help a lot, I would say. Learn a little bit about music, how it works on an instrument. This will help a lot. The second thing you need to do is listen to music analytically. If you're interested in electronic music, start with that. Listen and take it apart in your brain. Learn to separate the layers. Okay, there's this synth doing this, there's this drum machine doing this. How are they combined? Why? What makes tension? What releases the tension? Then learn a little bit about the history of it. And what I mean by that is, do you need to reinvent the wheel? The wheel was invented many years ago. So learning about the history of the music that you want to do is very crucial. Learn about, the different types of electronic music. What hardware were they using? The history of the synthesizer, for example. And then you will find out that, there were like two schools eventually, like the West Coast and the East Coast. There's no book that I can say, read this and then you've learned. It's a huge journey that you need to take. And the only way to take it is just start, start learning and know that it will never end. But also know that you can right now search for free subtractive synthesizer and start experimenting with sounds. Unfortunately, while there's a ton of material online, there's also a ton of really bad material online. Part of the process of all things that you learn is filtering good and bad information, and this is something that just comes out of experience. It's a long and winding road for sure, but it's definitely worth taking. Super Chicken 2006 asks, is there any advice you'd give to someone trying to get into composition, specifically game music production? I've been playing piano and learning music for about 9 months now, but I find it hard to compose, and music production software is so overwhelming. Getting into composition and particularly game music. Now, here's a thing that I want to say. Don't think about game music composition. Game music composition is no different and should not be any different than any other type of composition. This will come into play later when you think about the mechanics of game music. But other than that, what you should focus in is writing good music. And this doesn't have to do with games. First thing first, listen to a lot of music. You say you studied for 9 months and it's hard to compose. My friend, I've been studying for 30 years, I don't know, and I find it hard to compose. So don't expect that to be easy. Now, if you want to study composition, I would say a little bit of theory is necessary. You need to figure out how music works and why it works. Now, about the technical stuff, like familiarizing yourself with production software, I know that this is extremely hard. The way it unlocked in my head, I was at a friend's house who knew Cubase way better than I, and we did some recordings and I watched him work. So if you have a friend who has a studio, it doesn't have to be Cubase, it doesn't matter. Once you kind of unlock this, it will be like, decoding the matrix. Of course, there are plenty of online videos about Cubase and all DAWs, but don't be afraid to press F1 If you think that you want to do something, 99.99% of the times your software can do it, and it can do it in a simple way. Okay, now a couple of questions about inspiration. AK47 Lawson asks, who or what inspires your music the most? Why do you like composing music in very interesting measures? And Something Dumb asks, how do you get the inspiration to make such awesome songs? I know that you reference other material in a lot of them, so I just want to know. Yeah, okay, so I'm definitely inspired a lot by other music. Sometimes I will get inspired on a more general sense, but other times I love some music so much that I directly reference in my own music. But yeah, music is only part of what inspires me. I'd say the other thing is art in general. I get inspired a lot of the books I read, and this is a great source of inspiration. I get inspired by films. And I don't mean film soundtracks, I mean the films themselves. But the most important source of inspiration is other people, my friends, the people I love, the people I talk with. For me, that's the number one thing. And I know this is kind of like a bullshit answer, I know it sounds like that, but it is true. It's not that I will talk with someone and I will think, oh yes, E minor, yes, thank you for this conversation. No, of course it's not like that. But it is that I love interacting with people, I love having people around me that love me and that I love them. And this is kind of what drives me. First and foremost, I want to write music that they enjoy. As far as the interesting time signatures, yeah, I mentioned before that it's part of my musical heritage here in Greece and kind of Eastern music. And it's very important to me that if you have a sheet of music, it says 4/4 or whatever time signature. This is not something that is an arbitrary choice for me. I consider it a very specific choice, and when I sit down and write a motif or a melody or whatever, this is something that I take into consideration a lot. Fish in Bowl asks, what made you such a good composer? Okay, good composer reveal at 100,000 subs. And what inspired you and how long have you been composing? We just talked about the inspiration, but how long I've been composing? I've been composing seriously since I was roughly 19. So that would be 22 years now. But I've also been writing music, like silly compositions, ever since I started playing the piano. Maybe not at 8 years old, but 10, 11 or something like that. But seriously composing, yeah, about 19. So let's talk a little bit about gear. Mexican Mastermind asks, do you have a favorite motive to play? That's a weird one. No, I can tell you. And do you plan to integrate or use an EWI for future songs? This is an EWI, and no, I do not plan to use it or integrate it. First of all, I don't play, reed and wind instruments in general. But the thing with fancy controllers is that every time I'm using a fancy controller, at the end of the day, I get bored of it and go back into my trusty keyboard and a bunch of knobs. Keyboard because the keyboard is the way I've learned to create music and I'm very familiar with it. And then a bunch of knobs because I can associate its knob with a thing on the virtual synth or whatever, or control anything I want and just do the thing. And this to me is the best way because it's, for me, the most direct way. If someone is a wind player, maybe they feel much more familiar with using an EWI, but it doesn't make much sense for me. So Thomas W asks, which DAWs have you used in the past and what do you like about them? Okay, I'm a user of Cubase most of the time. I've, at one point or another in my life, sat in front of screens showing a variety of DAWs. I've sat in front of Pro Tools quite a bit. I've sat in front of Logic for a little bit. I've sat in front of Reaper, Ableton Live. None of them felt to me that they had something that I absolutely must have and I need to switch from Cubase. I've been using Cubase from very early on. My first version of Cubase was VST32, I think. Cubase 5, VST32 or something like that. It's this horrible thing right here. The other DAW that I have worked on is called Renoise, which is a very particular piece of software because it's a tracker. And if you're not familiar with a tracker, when you're looking at a traditional DAW, usually things go left to right and you have your tracks and they're stacked and you have your buses and your master section. For the tracker, instead, you program each note on a grid. So you program the notes, you program the durations, the effects that might happen on the notes. And it's a wonderful piece of software that I've done an album on. I had literally just Renoise, a laptop, and a piece of earbuds, which in retrospect is part of the reason why hexadecimal sounds so horrible. But the thing about it is that because it was so vastly different from Cubase, it put me in this mindset and in this new workflow, and I had to write really, really different music. I had to approach my own process from a very different perspective, and that was really, really enjoyable for me. I mean, other than that, I'm a happy user of Cubase. If I had to choose a DAW right now, I would probably use Reaper, but I've been using Cubase for so long that until this very moment, they haven't given me a real reason to swap. If they go on a subscription model, I will uninstall Cubase and move to Reaper. So Mr. Laugh-A-Lot asks, what's your opinion experience with free music software? If you have any recommendations on that front, I'd like to know, since personally I can't afford a paid software at the moment. Okay, back when I started, free software wasn't too much of a thing, and that's why I had acquired a lot of software. But at this time, there's really no reason to acquire software. You can literally get free software for anything, starting from DAW. You can right now go download Reaper and it's fully functional, you can use it. As far as synths and plugins, just Google best free plugins and you'll find a bunch of sites that have lists and have links to them, and they are all fine. You can perfectly do your job with 100% free software at this point and produce great music with it. Something that I really want to stress out is that you never need to be worried about a particular piece of software you've seen someone using. So if you see me using a Pro C compressor or Serum or whatever Arturia plugin I'm using or whatever, you don't need to care about that. It's a synth. You can get a free subtractive synth and do the same thing. You can get a free compressor and do the same thing. You can use the stock EQ and get the same result. It doesn't matter. The sophistication that you might get from a very good plugin has to do with two things. Okay, there may be finer programming that sometimes might produce a cleaner sound or a particular sound, an analog emulation or something. And the other thing is that sometimes you're paying for a better interface, or you're getting a compressor that has 10 algorithms inside it instead of having the one. Once you learn to use a compressor, the need for a better compressor will come from that, and you can still find a better free compressor or invest on one compressor that at that time you will have the experience to get the one that you really need. I don't have any specific recommendations. It doesn't really matter. Just Google it and you'll find plenty of lists. Jason McKinney asks, are there any cheaper alternatives to recreate your iconic electric guitar synth? Well, Jason, I mentioned it even in the video. You can literally get any subtractive synth, any distortion plugin, any delay plugin, and you can do it. And the video will pop up kind of like here, or if you have a widescreen, it will be like further up there. You can get equivalent parts for all the pieces in it. The foundation, the synthesizer I'm using, any subtractive synthesizer can be used. So Potassium for All asks, what's a good recommendation for music editing software? For now, I've just been using GarageBand on my Mac. I'm not 100% sure what you mean by editing software. If you really mean editing software, perhaps you might go with Audacity. Depending on how much money you can pay, I would say that the best editing software would be either Wavelab or Isotope RX. Depending on the editing you do, you can do most of that stuff inside GarageBand. So just keep using GarageBand. If you're looking for a new DAW, I would say the best thing is to go for Reaper. And if you're on a Mac, Logic is also an option, but better learn any DAW that is not platform specific, because maybe at some point you want to leave the Mac platform and go on a PC or whatever. And if you have learned Logic or GarageBand, it's going to be tough.